Hi, everyone. Today I'll be presenting our work titled Why Combining Text and Visualization Could Improve Bayesian Reasoning, a Cognitive Load Perspective. I'm Melanie Bancilhon, and this work was a collaboration with researchers from Washington University in St. Louis and Smith College. Bayesian reasoning is the process of applying evolving knowledge and evidence to compute the likelihood of an event. A common application is the interpretation of medical test results, which can contain false positives or false negatives. It has been shown that people, including experts, perform poorly at reasoning with Bayesian data. In a study from prior work, 95% of physicians overestimated the true positive rate of a hypothetical disease by about 67%. This can lead to poor decision making, such as overprescription of drugs. Consider the following Bayesian problem describing the spread of a hypothetical disease and outcomes from an imperfect test that detects whether or not a person has this disease. This problem is presented using probabilities in the form of natural frequencies, in other words, countable items, which has been shown to facilitate Bayesian reasoning. Several researchers have proposed to use visualizations such as the icon array for Bayesian facilitation, as it encodes information in the form of natural frequencies. It has countable items that highlight the relationships between the overlapping sets in the data, making it easy to identify the number of positive tests and the number of true positive outcomes. However, investigations into the use of icon arrays to improve accuracy in Bayesian reasoning have produced mixed findings. Some studies have found that icon arrays can reduce errors only when displayed without their text equivalent. Researchers have hypothesized that this effect could be due to an increase in cognitive load, but there is no current evidence on the amount of cognitive load exerted by different presentation formats when performing Bayesian reasoning. Cognitive load can be defined as a multidimensional construct representing the load that performing a task has on the cognitive system. In other words, it measures how much effort is required to undertake a task. While this metric is not as commonly used compared to speed and accuracy, it is useful to paint a complete picture of Bayesian reasoning. In our work, we wanted to know whether different formats, namely text, the icon array, and a combination of the icon array and text, exert different levels of cognitive load when performing Bayesian reasoning. More specifically, we wanted to know whether combining text and visualization increased cognitive load. Cognitive load can be measured by looking at working memory, which is defined as multiple subcomponents in the mind that store a finite amount of information for a short period of time. There are a number of ways to evaluate working memory. Physical methods such as EEG or pupillometry are effective, but require a significant amount of equipment. In our work, we used 3 different methods of measuring working memory: individual differences in working memory, a dual task methodology, and finally, experience workload. We can measure differences in working memory capacity using an operation span task. In this particular task, adapted from prior work, a series of images have to be memorized while answering simple math questions. Images then have to be recalled in the correct order. Participants were shown a series of 4, 5, and 6 images in the OSPAN task. If we find that people with low working memory capacity have difficulties when solving the Bayesian problem with one or more formats presented, then we would have some evidence that those formats required a lot of working memory. The dual task methodology involves comparing performance in a single task to performance in a dual task when conducting a single task along with a secondary task. Our single task involves solving the Bayesian problem. In our dual task, users are shown a pattern of dots on a grid before the single task that they have to memorize and reproduce after completion of the single task. The dual task assesses the dependency of a particular task on cognitive resources. If performance in the dual task is significantly worse than performance in the single task using one or more formats, it indicates that they required significant working memory. Finally, we measured users' experience workload using a TLX questionnaire. We analyzed data from 299 participants recruited on Amazon Mechanical Turk. We conducted a between-subject experiment where participants were assigned one presentation format and saw either the single task or the dual task. Now, let's look at our findings. First, to establish a baseline for Bayesian performance, we looked at the differences in accuracy. Now, let's look at our findings. First, to establish a baseline for Bayesian performance, we looked at the differences in accuracy across the three formats when answering the Bayesian questions. Here, error measures the deviation from the correct true positive rate. We found that users made significantly smaller errors when using visualization and text together compared to text alone. Differences between visualization alone and the other formats were not significant. When looking at error across participants in the high working memory group, which was determined using the O-span scores, we found no significant differences in error across presentation formats. But when looking at individuals with low working memory capacity, we found that they made significantly less errors using visualization alone compared to text alone. This is evidence that text elicited a higher cognitive load than visualization alone. This finding is reinforced when comparing performance across working memory groups when using text. Participants with higher working memory made significantly less errors than participants with low working memory. When looking at the NASA TLX responses, we did not see any differences across the effort or mental demand subscales of the NASA TLX, which are the most relevant to a research question. However, we did see an effect of presentation format on frustration. Overall, people, both working memory groups combined, who saw Vistext reported feeling significantly less frustrated than those who saw text alone. Finally, when analyzing data for the dual task, we found no significant differences in the single task and the dual task. We believe that this was due to a ceiling effect caused by the already high difficulty of the Bayesian task. Still, our findings point to evidence that, contrarily to our initial beliefs, combining text and visualization for Bayesian reasoning does not increase cognitive load. Visualization and text combined showed better accuracy and less perceived frustration compared to text alone that elicited significant effort. Finally, visualization alone has shown to elicit better accuracy compared to text alone among low working memory individuals. Our results highlight that it is not enough to look at only measures of accuracy when evaluating presentation formats. Individual differences in working memory capacity impact performance and perceived workload with different formats when performing Bayesian reasoning. Thank you for listening, and you can reach out to us for any questions.